Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. Today I'm talking about Gryphons in the Elder Scrolls universe. Of all the animals in the Elder Scrolls universe, these majestic creatures are often a fan favorite. So what exactly makes them so special? Let's find out in this video. So, Gryphons. Gryphons are large winged animals which seem to be a fusion of lions with eagles. They often appear not only in fantasy stories but also in real-life ancient myths, where in some civilizations like Egypt and even Greece they were part of religious myths for a very long time. In the Elder Scrolls universe we can also come across them, specifically around southwestern Tamriel, as most Gryphons live on the Somerset Isles, although both Elsewhere and High Rock, and even in some sources Valenwood, hold smaller Gryphon populations, with the biggest of these smaller populations by far being in Elsewhere, where you could say that an actual Gryphon colony has taken root, at least around the Second Era. And considering that Gryphons actually play a role in some Yokudan iconography, but they do not seem to have a colony in Hammerfell strangely, it's not too strange to speculate that they may also live on the remains of Yokuda or lived in Yokuda before its fall. There's also many different types of Gryphon in the Elder Scrolls universe, from the snow-white snow-capped Gryphon, which lives on the highest mountain peaks in the snow of the Somerset Isles, to the blue and white pale plume Gryphon, and even the Firepoint Gryphon, which have their distinct red head and tail, which is mostly found in Elsewhere. We also have the Scald Muse Gryphon, which has an even more vibrant set of colors than the Elsewhere Firepoint Gryphon, but we don't really know where their origins lie, or really where any of the specific colors originate other than the Firepoint Gryphon and the Snowcap Gryphon. You also have the regular brown Gryphon, and they mostly seem to originate on the Somerset Isles and also seem to actually be in other places, so that's the most common type of Gryphon. But again, we don't really know where they originate. The best recorded origins of just Gryphons in general, so not the specific types, lies on the Somerset Isles however, specifically Alinor, where they were first seen in recorded history by the settling Aldmer after their exodus from their home continent of Aldmeris. It's said that ever since the Aldmer saw these majestic creatures glide across the sky in the earliest times, as they fought against the then really harsh climate of the Somerset Isles, they dreamed of taming the creatures and riding them across the sky. However, Gryphons are mighty and wild creatures, which would prove to be untamable for the early Aldmer, despite generations of them trying to tame them. Gryphons have very strong wills, which are not easily bent, and they can be very aggressive, especially when protecting their nests or their young fledglings. And because they are carnivores with a very wide range of appetites, many an Aldmer got straight up eaten by them as they attempted to tame them. Especially since the early Aldmer eradicated the early dangers from the Somerset Isles in those years, which the sources that we do have from before clearly recorded history describe as demons, but were likely just very dangerous animals. Gryphons quickly rose through the food chain, and as of recorded history they are among the predators at the top of the food chain on the Somerset Isles when they are grown-up adults. Although their young fledglings are very nice meals for lions and walruses among other creatures, if they can get to them when their parents are not around, of course. Which actually can happen, as Gryphons are hunters, and they could be away from their nests to get food for their fledglings. Food which they then tend to drag back to their nests for their fledglings to eat and pick clean. As hunters, they tend to have a relatively strong territorial hunting tendency. They will generally hunt in a specific area, eating most anything that they can find. That's meat from farmer livestock like cows and pigs, to wild animals. Although curiously they do not seem to mind the presence of other Gryphons on their hunting ground, if we can use the game as a reliable source, as we can spot different seemingly non-related Gryphons living very close to one another. So it does seem that Gryphons tend to respect and not eat other Gryphons, rather focusing their hunting on the outside world and the animals within it. It also seems that they do not eat their own, not even their own discarded young, which is what we see with some animals in our own world, where if a young is discarded they get eaten by the rest. You see, some Gryphons may be born with a birth defect called wing rot, which prevents them from flying. If a fledgling has this defect, they are generally not eaten, but rather they are just cast out of the nest, which generally leads to them being eaten by other predators, as they cannot fly yet, or they won't ever be able to fly. Although around the Second Era there are those who keep those cast out Gryphons either as pets or keep them in conservatories, hoping to cure them from their wing rot. That said, their hunting and nesting grounds are generally in the mountains and rocky areas, as they generally make their nests on either very inaccessible high peaks and cliffs to decrease accessibility for other predators that do not have wings like them, or they shelter their nests by rocks to camouflage their nests. This is also why in part it took so long for the Gryphons to eventually get tamed, as adult wild Gryphons are just outright impossible to tame. But fledgling Gryphons that are hatched from eggs which are hatched away from their parents are actually able to be tamed, but it took a long while for the Aldmer to find this out, as the Gryphon eggs are notoriously hard to obtain due to the ferocity of the parents and the locations of the nests being hard to access. And even when the ancient Aldmer were able to get their hands on these eggs, so Gryphon eggs, which were taken from the nest, they are very hard to hatch. Generations of Aldmer tried to hatch the eggs, but no matter their patience and the conditions that they kept the eggs in, none would hatch. The only reason why the eggs kept being taken from the nests at one point was to be eaten as royal delicacies at banquets of the early clan kings and queens of the Somerset Isles, as the Aldmer had all but given up on ever hatching them themselves. However, one day a method was found to hatch them, purely by accident actually. The Aldmer clan king Olorome, who would find an abandoned Gryphon egg after he and his tribe likely hunted down its parents for sport or for meat, wanted to prepare the egg for consumption. He placed it in a cooking fire and the tribe would then sing before the grand meals to bless the meal. But this singing had an unexpected result. The warm temperatures of the fire in combination with the pure singing voices of these early Aldmer led to the egg hatching and a young fledgling Gryphon emerging from the flames like a phoenix with its red wings. Olorome would take the fledgling in its hands and name it Sel Hinwe, a name which I could not find the canon meaning of, but someone online claimed it meant something like Kingly Gift of the Fire or something like that, but I could not verify that for the life of me, so don't hold it against me. Literally, I spent, I think, a quarter of my research time trying to verify that, but I couldn't. Interestingly, as a side note, this birth of Sel Hinwe is the only mention in lore of phoenixes in the Elder Scrolls, other than some item names. I would like to make a lore video on phoenixes when I read this, but there's no lore on them I could find. I mean, just so you know, and you're not going to ask me make a lore video about phoenixes. Anyway, Sel Hinwe would grow up as a mighty ally of Lord Olorome, who would become the eventual lord of the settlement, which would grow into the city of Sunhold, and his lineage would deliver Sunhold's future kin lords and kin ladies, so the rulers of that city, with the descendants of Sel Hinwe being their bound companions, to a point where the Kinlord's Gryphon would become Sunhold's most recognizable symbol around the Isles, as its mighty protector. And actually Sel Hinwe's far descendant, Sunnawell, and his kin lady would eventually play a role in the fall of Sunhold, on which I made a video, which is in the description for those wanting to know more about that. So, after Lord Olorome first tamed a Gryphon this way, many elves have tried, with only very few succeeding. But those who did succeed almost universally were or became mighty warriors with their Gryphon companion at their side. For example, we also have evidence that tamed Gryphons were the mounts of ancient Ayleid warrior kings, or at least some of them, after the exodus of some Aldmer to Cyrodiil, who would eventually become the Ayleid elves. Although the descendants of these Gryphons taken by the Ayleids are now nowhere to be seen since the human Imperials gained control, and thus they are likely extinct by now or living only on the highest peaks of the mountains of Cyrodiil, far away from humanity, as that is how the snow-capped Gryphons actually remained a legend among the Aldmer for a very long time back in the Meretic era, as nobody had seen these snow-white Gryphons since they lived very high on the mountains and actually camouflaged themselves in the clouds when they flew away. Anyway, having a Gryphon as your companion gives you unrivaled mobility compared to other warriors, flying almost everywhere at a moment's notice and fleeing from battlefields, the quickest of them all. This is why the Welkenar Knights, extremely strong protectors of the Somerset Isles that are based in the city of Cloudrest, use the Gryphons exclusively as their mount and their companion. I made a video on this as well a while back, so I recommend watching that video for full information about their order and how they use their Gryphons. But something interesting to take from their story in regards to Gryphons is that their story shows that the Gryphons actually possess extreme intelligence, and their mental capacity is pretty good when it's trained. Because during their training with the Welkenar Knights, when they hatch a Gryphon egg, they, so the rider and the fledgling Griffin both undergo magical rituals to enhance their bonds to a point where the Griffin and the Knight fully understand each other and actually become an extension of one another with their feelings. With Griffins being able to this way understand very complicated commands and do very complicated tasks. Whether or not this intelligence is unlocked by those rituals or whether wild Griffins possess a similar intelligence is unknown. But yeah, watch that video on the Welkenar Knights for more information about that, because I do not like repeating myself. Anyway, it's not just those knightly orders and big, powerful kings and powerful warriors that can hatch and train Griffins, as we have seen other examples during history, but it's very hard to do, so usually the ones that do have a Griffin as their companion are usually very powerful warriors or mighty kings or those kind of figures. Anyway, that's all I can say about Griffins in the Elder Scrolls universe. I do hope that you learned something today, and if you did, I hope you will consider returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video next week. But before I end this video, as usual, allow me to thank my top Patreon supporters for making this all possible. Mr. Bernardo Binna, Gabriel Binna, Paulo Rasputin, Athena Iotis, King Chris, Bulge, Scram of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Sarah McCall, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to all these people and all the others on screen, which is even more because those are my regular Patreon supporters, that this channel stays alive and that I can make these videos almost every week. And for that, I am very grateful. That said, I hope to see you all in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.